in our series, Affordable Housing in Falls Church, Problems and Prospects. Here with me is Allison Brown, co-president of the League of Women Voters, and I'm Hal Lippman, president of Citizens for Better City. Just under 2 months ago, we held our initial forum, which focused on a discussion of the 40-year history of affordable housing in our city. In this forum, 4 panelists, an affordable housing advocate, 2 former mayors who had also served as planning commissioners, and a developer with a long history of involvement in Falls Church, described what had happened between 1980 and 2020. The overarching theme of their opening statements and question and answer responses was that despite numerous well-conceived projects and proposals and persistent efforts to increase affordable housing in our community, the results achieved amounted to, in the words of one panelist, quote, "a dismal record," unquote. The panelists also had much to say about what they believed caused this lack of success. Foremost in this regard, that all repeatedly cited factors such as not in my backyard resistance, we also know it as NIMBYism, opposition based on cost concerns and fear mongering, and the lack of interest and political will among city council members and other community leaders. One panelist, for example, recalled an occasion when an anonymous flyer appeared suddenly in response to an affordable housing proposal being considered, which stated that, quote, "poor people equal theft," unquote, and warn readers, quote, "to protect your daughters," unquote. In addition, during the panel discussion, the point was emphasized that it was very difficult for advocates to gain much traction because a single no carried as much weight as 100 yeses. Lastly, there was pointed discussion of the legacy of racial discrimination in housing in general, and the absence of any focus on diversity in affordable housing in particular. One panelist recalled restrictive covenants still being in documents involved in purchasing his home in our city in the 1980s. Several panelists also noted that affordable housing in Falls Church meant workforce housing for teachers and city employees, not housing for lower income individuals and families. Allison?
The first forum set the stage for today's discussion, which will focus on the current status of efforts to increase affordable housing in our community. That is, what's happened recently and is happening as we come together today. The quick answer is a lot. We've had a number of exciting developments in the affordable housing area in the last year, including additions to affordable apartment units in a major development and a multi-million-dollar grant award. To explain these developments, as well as the context in which they've been taking place, we've brought together a fantastic mix of discussants. We'll hear from a key elected local representative, a deeply involved and experienced city official, a former resident of an affordable apartment in our city, who also served as chair of the Housing Commission here in Falls Church City, a senior representative of a development company currently involved in projects on West Broad Street, and an affordable housing advocate with extensive regional knowledge and experience. We're looking forward to hearing from them and anticipate that you'll find what they have to say interesting, enlightening, and thought-provoking. So let me pass you along now to our esteemed moderator, Nancy Vincent, who's the director of the city's Department of Housing and Human Services. Nancy?
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Hal. I do want to, before I get started, remind everybody to, if you're not speaking, to please put yourself on mute. And for any participants, if any questions come up as you're listening to the presenters, please put them in the chat, and somebody will be reviewing them and asking them of the presenters at the end of their remarks. So I do want to say that what the League of Women Voters and Citizens for Better City are doing with this series of 3 forums is so important for all of our understanding of the challenges and promises of affordable housing. Across the nation, we're hearing the cry for equity, for inclusion, and for better lives for all of us. it's likely that our understanding of what makes a healthy and prosperous community is coming more into focus. What benefits one segment of the community benefits the entire community. Our panel of experts today have heard this cry loudly and are working hard for the benefit of our community. So we're going to hear first from each of our speakers. And when they're done, I have a few questions for them, and then the forum will be opened up for questions for the people who are viewing it today. So our first speaker is Letty Hardy. Falls Church residents elected her to City Council in 2015. And since then, she has served on the council's Economic Development Committee and is an active liaison to several boards and commissions: the Economic Development Authority, Housing Commission, Recreation and Parks Advisory Board, and Arts and Humanities Council. She is chair of the council's Appointments Committee, which ensures that citizens have an active voice in city affairs. She has been a passionate voice promoting affordable housing and other projects to make the city a better place to live. So Letty, let me turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Nancy. And thank you to the League and the CBC for hosting this. First of all, I'm flattered to be considered an expert on this topic. It's certainly a passion of mine, but I certainly don't consider myself an expert. And clearly we've seen a lot of visible progress in the city the past really 3 or 4 months, but really I think it's the groundwork has been in process for the years. And so really I want to applaud the people who came before me and those voices who've been consistently raising this, because it has been kind of one of the top issues for our community. So hopefully today we'll talk about kind of the 3 big wins, and just to set the stage. You may have heard that we've gotten 10% affordable housing at the latest development at Broad and Washington, and that is a big deal. Previously our policy was 6%. And so that adds 34 units on a base of, I think, around 240 in the city. And then on top of that, Founders Row, which Joe Muffler here is also representing, which is under development at Broad and West. That's going to add another 30 units. So 60 units just coming online in the next few years on top of our base of 240 market of rental units. That is a big deal. That's adding 20%. So that's the first big win. The second is the Amazon grant. You may have heard that we won as a city $3.7 million, and we've been able to do a couple innovative things, including creating a home ownership program, which we haven't had in a while. And the third is we've acquired property at the Virginia Villages, which we'll talk more about. That's on South Maple near the bowling alley. And so why affordable housing? That's kind of the what, the why. So for me, it's always been a personal issue. I think I firmly believe that from my own background, that housing and strong public education are really the reasons why my family and I had the opportunities we did as first generation immigrants. My husband and I also had the opportunity to move back to the city 17 years ago. And this is a city where he grew up in. And so for me, when we talk about diversity, generational diversity is certainly really important to me. And so when I think about why we had the opportunity to move back in as newly graduated newlyweds, I think about whether that opportunity is there for other people in this current generation. And I want to make sure that we do something about that. And then third reason I think on the why is really it's both values as well as kind of a long-term sustainability issue for the city. Clearly, with the reawakening in this past summer across the US, there's social and racial justice issues linked with housing. But at the end of the day, if you care about economic development, if you care about transportation, if you care about the environment, stormwater, small business, having strong workforce, those are all interrelated with housing. And so this is why housing policy is so central to all of it. And so now as kind of a member of city council, I believe that advocating for strong affordable housing policies and just in general, more diverse housing stock is really critical to the city's future.
Thank you. So next we have Dana Lewis, who is the Deputy Director of the city's Department of Human Services. She's been with the city for 15 years and is a resident of Centerville, Virginia. She also serves as co-chair of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Housing Directors Advisory Group. She is passionate about affordable housing and how safe and sustainable housing positively impacts families. Dana.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and thank you for having me. I have a slight presentation and I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about the overview of the state of affordable housing in the city and some exciting things that we're doing, some of which Letty shared. So I'm just going to briefly share this presentation, if I can get it there. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. So just to start out, this is just just a graphic that kind of shows that compares the housing stock in the city from 2012 to 2019. It's just kind of an analysis. And these are units that are affordable to persons at 60% of the area median income. And the area median income is what HUD uses to determine what an average income would be for a family of 4 in this particular area. They do it by region, but so that for our area. So since 2012, we've lost 4 committed affordable homeownership units, and they've gone to market rate. We've also lost 193 market rate affordable units, and those have gone, those are no longer affordable. So these are some of the measures that the city looks for. We look at preserving the current stock of market rate of rental units in the city. And you can see what our 2012 stock was and what it was in 2019. And then our affordable committed rental units. Now, the market rate are what the market has, and committed are those units that have some type of restriction on them to keep them affordable. And then the current stock of affordable owned unitships in the cities, those are affordable dwelling unit ownership units that the city has a covenant on to retain affordability. So you can take a look at that. We'll go to the next one. And I'm hurrying because I have 5 minutes. Some of our guiding policy documents that the city has are the Affordable Living Policy, which was last adopted in 2019, and the Comprehensive Plan. The Affordable Living Policy is updated every 3 to 5 years, and the Comprehensive Plan is usually updated every 5 years. And those kind of guide us on policy for the city. So if you're a city resident, I'm sure you've seen the city talking about these units. And we also have city input in those. And so these are the Affordable Dwelling Unit Program. These are the units that the city retains affordability. For as far as homeownership units, we have 3 properties in the city that have affordable units in them. And you can see their expiration dates for those units. And then as far as rental, these are the properties that have rental units and the control periods that keeps them affordability, and then when they expire. Go to the next slide. And then the city, we received a grant in 2019 to have a consultant, to hire a consultant to do a study of what the status of affordable housing was in the city and what affordability was, and to make some recommendations. So they kind of studied everything that we provided them that was going on in the city. And these are some of the recommendations that they made. And they were under 3 categories: financial resources that the city needs to use to retain affordability, strengthening existing policies and programs, and implementing the accessory homes zoning ordinance. So just in a nutshell, the financial resource, the city has an affordable housing fund that receives funds from developers when they're doing properties, or the city can also put money in the affordable use for housing fund, and then is used for creating or preserving affordable housing. And then let's see, let's go back. Okay. And then we also were lucky enough this year to receive a grant for Amazon. That's a funding that's through the Virginia Housing, and we applied for it and received those funds, and I'll talk about that briefly. And then as far as strengthening existing policies and programs, it kind of talked about some of those things that I talked about earlier, that affordable living policy, our comp plan, and what we plan to do as far as creating and preserving affordable housing. And then it also recommended changing the zoning so that accessory homes might be allowed in the city. We did apply for Amazon grant funding and we received it. And so the city received $3,750,000 of grant funds to do two projects. One is an affordable homeownership program where we're going to be creating new homeownership opportunities. We're going to be purchasing units and then reselling them at an affordable rate. The project number two was to buy down an extension of covenants for the teacher workforce units that we have in the city. And so we are extending the affordability period for those units.
You can't see anything, and I can't hear
I'm sorry,
you.
who's saying, is that everyone or is that?
There's nothing on the screen. There's nothing on the screen, and I can't see anything,
Maybe your Zoom setup because it's working fine.
and your voice is breaking up.
It sounds like you might have bandwidth issues, so apologize for that.
Okay.
Yes, I can see fine as well.
Yeah, me too.
I can see and hear fine.
Okay,
Same.
thank you. I was worried. And then I can easily make these available if anyone cannot hear or see. So this just kind of gives you an example of how that homeownership program will work. And I only had 5 minutes, so I'd be more than happy to talk about some of this later on. So going on to the next person.
Thank you, Dana. So our next speaker is Julio Idrobo. He is the past chair of the Falls Church Housing Commission. He also lived in an affordable dwelling unit in Pearson Square from 2014 to 2019 and has extensive experience in advocacy promoting affordable housing. So Julio.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for League Women Borders of our Church and the CBC. Okay, we have an important topic and I'm passionate about this. And let me talk about my experience as a user of affordable dwelling unit. I have to put it in perspective. In 2007, 2008 is the time that I was trying to start looking for an affordable dwelling unit, or maybe for a program in the city. And it was a time that the economy was collapsing. My job was in jeopardy. My income was reduced maybe in half. So I was looking for options in the city to see if I can get some help. And I found this, that the city has this affordable dwelling unit program. And I found this guy that they gave me information about, okay, we have an affordable dwelling unit that is going to be for sale. Do you want to participate? There are 2 people already qualified. You want to be the third person, it's going to be like, no, I say, oh my God, this is like the Mega Million. And you're telling me that you have 3 tickets. And I was, of course, I was in a hurry to just tell my wife, okay, just run. We need to get these documents to apply for an affordable dwelling unit. And we are in the drawing and the guy say, okay, and the winning of this ticket is, oh my God, yeah, it was not me. It was the guy next to me. And I had to persist and I have to insist, and the spectrum came available and I was participating and I didn't win, but I insist, and I was struggling to pay to live in the city. However, I insist until the Pearson Square became available and I get one of those units. And this is how it worked for me. Let me tell you something that sometimes people don't understand. When I get this affordable housing, I was willing to start spending in health because I didn't have health insurance. I was able to start spending some money in more groceries, in clothes, in other things. And I start doing something that I couldn't do before, which is I start saving money. So I have a goal to get a piece of this land in America. And I was able. However, the same affordable housing policies that we have in the city, I couldn't afford to live in the city and couldn't afford to buy in the city something because it was too expensive. But when I get something from the city, I try to give back, and I became a housing commissioner. And I started understanding what the problems of housing were. And I started understanding what affordable housing was. And I started understanding that affordable housing, there are 2 simple words. but affordable is not for everyone and is not the same meaning for everyone. And I start understanding that housing has not the same meaning for everyone. Like, for example, a young lady that just got out of the college and is not the same meaning for a family of three that just got out of the maybe the shelter, for example. So the more I knew it, the more worried I was getting. I was getting into this housing situation, and this is something important. In the city for church, an average price of a house is $865,000. If you are a college student, just get out of the college, how you can afford that? So who can buy this? So the person can buy is the person that has high income, maybe older than I am, maybe a mostly white. And this person stay in the city for a long time until they die. And who can buy this property? Another older person, with high income, mostly white. You see what the problem of diversity is. Because you cannot have a young person buying a three-family that is struggling, they cannot buy in the city, or they cannot rent in the city with these high prices that we have in the city. You cannot allow a teacher that you are proud of that has their kids to be receiving the same education that is teaching to your children because they cannot afford to have a piece of land in the city. That's a problem. The guy that is serving you in the Starbucks, they cannot get a piece of a rental in the city because 1 bedroom is almost $2,000, 2 bedroom is almost $2,800, and 3 bedroom is more than $3,000. Let me give you just an example to finish this. If you make $15 an hour, work full time, you make a year, and in 1 year, $31,000. Do you think that with that salary you can get a piece of the land in Parcho City? No, you cannot. It's not affordable. Even if you are two people, $60,000, you cannot afford because you have to spend more than 50% of your money, your monthly income in housing. So when this affordable housing came to my experience, it gave me a lot of things that benefit me and my family. And I was willing to give back something to the city. So the more we promote these programs, the best, I think. And I can comment on this and respond to some questions because we have a limited time. So let's see what Ole has to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julio. So our next speaker is Joe Muffler, who serves as Managing Director of Development for Mill Creek Residential Mid-Atlantic. He is responsible for managing all aspects of the development process, including site acquisition, design, entitlements, financing, and eventual disposition for Mill Creek Mid-Atlantic communities. Mr. Muffler joined Mill Creek as an associate in 2013, and prior to his role in development was responsible for developing company-wide research, portfolio allocation, and investor relations strategies. So Joe, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And that is a hard act to follow. That was a fantastic intro, Julio, and to the rest of you all as well. I must say I am honored to be a part of this panel. And I think on the face of it all, it may seem a little interesting to have a for-profit developer here on an affordable panel. But what I'd like to seek to do in these 5 minutes is speak about how while I may not be an affordable developer, quote unquote, that does not mean that I don't do affordable development. And I think that those misnomers can somewhat feed into a negativity on development as a whole, when in reality, development as a whole is great for affordable development as well. So as Nancy spoke of, I think many of you know me from the Founders Row project, and we have recently brought Founders Row Phase 2 before the city. But locally, Mill Creek in the last 10 years since I've joined the firm, we've built about 5,500 homes in the area. Over 500 of those are affordable homes. So it is a significant amount of affordability that you may not think comes out of someone in my shoes from a for-profit developer. And I think that's a good segue into how I kind of wanted to start this introduction, and then how Nancy and Allison asked me to kind of pull back the curtain on how we look at affordability from an economic perspective to hopefully educate everyone as to how policies can be crafted to work with developers to encourage affordable housing development. So there are really three pathways to affordable housing development. One is very straightforward. It's affordable development. And there are some incredible groups in this region that specialize in this, whether it's APA in Arlington or ARHA in the city of Alexandria. But, these are public-private partnerships that require some measure of tax credits, government grants, land grants, et cetera, to execute these type of projects. They are very complicated, but they are also very successful. And certainly they are integral to the affordable development process. So that's clearly the most, obvious way of affordable development. The second way is through inclusionary zoning practices that Councilmember Hardy spoke of earlier. So as a for-profit developer, like I said, 10% of our homes, maybe more, are affordable. Through the previous two for-profit developments the City of Falls Church has passed, the housing stock has increased by, I think, Councilmember Hardy said 20 to 25%. By working with for-profit developers to include inclusionary zoning tactics into your site plan process, you can net out directly significant affordable increases to your city's housing stock. The third method is an indirect method, and that's simply that development begets more affordability. More housing begets affordability. That's simply a matter of supply and demand economics. So the more housing that you're able to build, let's just use Founders Row. When Founders Row comes to market, we are going to have the 30 direct affordable units, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, those units will then be comparably more affordable, and the older housing stock becomes more and more affordable. That does not mean that the affordable housing has to be in the oldest stock imaginable, but more housing, more supply begets more affordability. So you have two direct methods, kind of one indirect method of affordability. Speaking a little bit about how I, as a for-profit developer, look at affordable housing. For us, everything comes down to financing, right? And the same thing is true for affordable housing developers as well. It's all about how you can structure the financing. When we underwrite the economics of our projected deals in a pro forma, there's one important figure that we look at, and we call it the spread. It's the spread between what we can build at today and what we believe we can sell at. Development is an incredibly risky business. All it takes is looking at the retail and the movie theater at phase one to see, extrapolated large, it's a very risky business. So frankly, my opinion doesn't matter. What matters are the opinions of the institutional capital, the banks, the pension funds, the people who put their money into these deals to finance them and to make them realities. That spread between building today and building in the future is a simple factor. It's essentially boiled down all the variables. It's about cost and it's about revenue. So as we're thinking through these community programs, it's important to think of them in those two things, right? What do we do? Is how does it impact cost and how does it impact revenue? Not how does it impact profits or anything like that, because those are the two things that if revenue goes down and cost goes up, your spread shrinks, that deal can't be financed. It's not going to get off the ground. So any theoretical affordable and then the trickle down cannot happen. I bring all this to say, I bring all this up to say that there is a limit to the cost, right? So what matters most to me, and frankly, this works now not just on the commercial side, but from as an individual land seller, what matters most to me is predictability and flexibility. It's important that when we work with a jurisdiction, we understand what the expectation is going in up front for those affordable requirements, be they 6%, 10%, 20%, whatever the case might be. And there are tools within there that I can speak of here in a couple of minutes. But that predictability, that predictability lets me up front work with land sellers to say, I understand exactly what's going to go into this project, right? And stepping back, big picture, if we think of this, in a bigger capacity, certainly for-profit development does a lot of things for a community beyond affordable housing. It's improvements to infrastructure, it's contributions to schools and parks and libraries and art and transportation, all of these things, right? They're all in a bucket of community benefits that help the city and the surrounding areas. But it is important to remember that if, as affordable housing increases, which certainly decreases the revenue, that trickles to some of these other community benefits as well. And how all of those interplay is very important. as we work with other jurisdictions, right, whether it's Arlington, Tyson's Corner, Fairfax County, Washington, D.C., right, and the City of Falls Church, the city has had a very great special exception process whereby developers like myself, in exchange for more density and then more revenue, we have to contribute these community benefits, of which a huge portion is the affordable housing. We've been working with Councilmember Hardy and other council members and planning commissions to figure out how do we optimize affordable housing and community benefits, whereby these deals can still happen because there is a ceiling to where all these things get. So how do we work together? And that's the flexibility component of that. So one thing I would like to touch on before I wrap up is a very important tool to consider. And Dana, I believe, was speaking about this, is how a jurisdiction can utilize the average median incomes, the area median incomes, and the different tiers of that to optimize affordable housing, because not all affordable housing is created equal. There are various tiers. So you look at some tiers, 20%, 30%, 40%. Those are deeply affordable housing tiers, even lower than that, 10% affordable housing. That do
So you got about 30 seconds left.
Yeah, that do require some of the tax credits. Then there are things like 60%, 80%, right? That are the more affordable, they're more general affordable. And just so you know, the difference between a 1-bedroom in terms of value at 60% and 80% AMI is about $100,000. You extrapolate that large to 30 or 40 units, and you can see how those values add up to the city for how you can play. So I encourage the city to utilize that as a tool. I just want to emphasize, market rate developers are a boon to affordability. We want affordability. We want to be able to contribute to the community. And I think that if we are brought into the context of these conversations, we can work towards that common goal. So thank you. I look forward to contributing more in this conversation.
Thank you, Joe, for that perspective. Our next speaker is Michelle Winters, who is Executive Director of the Alliance for Housing Solutions based in Arlington. The Alliance mission is to increase the supply of affordable housing in Arlington and Northern Virginia through public education, public development, advocacy, and innovation. Prior to working at the Alliance, she worked nationally on affordable housing issues for 20 years, but she's glad to be focusing here on her own backyard. So Michelle.
Hello, hi everybody. So I have the distinct pleasure of closing out these opening comments with some discussion of what kinds of things are going on in affordable housing around the region. And so I'm going to try to hit on a lot of different topics because there's a lot going on, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that anybody has about any of these things, or do any follow-up, because it's the mission of my organization to help increase affordable housing supply across the region, although we do focus on Arlington. So first I want to talk about multifamily affordable housing. You've heard about some of this today. I think that one of the biggest tools that we see being used for this is a local housing trust fund. We have a state housing trust fund. Arlington has actually a very strong housing trust fund. We are very lucky to have that. And that what that means, what a housing trust fund means is that we put in dollars out of our budget every year. So for instance, last year or this current budget year, the county just approved adding $16.9 million of its general fund money into the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. That money is then used to provide loans to mostly nonprofit affordable housing developers over time to build affordable housing. There's also inclusionary zoning. Fairfax County has inclusionary zoning. Arlington doesn't have inclusionary zoning, but it's similar. It used to be negotiated similar to the way that you guys do things, but now it's a very strict rules-based program that results in affordable housing contributions. Affordable housing contributions in Arlington are made not only for residential developers, but also for commercial developers. So our biggest win, I'll call it a win on that end, recently has been that the first phase of Amazon's HQ2, when it was approved in the land use process, it resulted in a $20 million developer contribution into Arlington's Affordable Housing Investment Fund. That is an unusual characteristic of these local programs around here. Many times these affordable housing contributions are only for residential, but Arlington's covers both residential and commercial. So that's out there as a possibility. And the bulk of affordable housing units, again, speaking of Arlington because I know it the best, in Arlington comes from these Affordable Housing Investment Fund investments with our nonprofit developers. They're typically building 100% affordable properties, usually in the 50 to 60% AMI range. And we've been working really hard with the developers and the county to try to increase the amount of units, the number of units that are actually serving much deeper income levels. So 30% of AMI is the new target. And just to give you a sense, Arlington has about 8,600 committed affordable dwelling units in the county, and less than 50 of those are at the 30% AMI level. So it's a big need. We do have Section 8 and housing grants programs that are tenant-based assistance to help, but there still is a very large gap. So that's some of the work that we're doing that is going on around the region on housing trust funds and density bonuses, by the way, are a major part of that inclusionary zoning. The other thing I wanted to mention is the work that some of the nonprofits are doing. Joe mentioned APA and AHDC. There are some very strong nonprofit developers around the region. AHC, APA, Wesley Housing, Enterprise Community Development are some of the leaders. And one of the things that has become a new sort of, I don't know if I want to call it a best practice, but a really interesting practice that they've been doing is what we call institutional partnerships. And they've been partnering with mainly churches, but not only churches. So an American Legion partnered with APA to basically, American Legion had land. They didn't have a much use for it anymore. Their membership was shrinking, but they needed to revitalize it. So they sold their land to APA to build an affordable housing project. And then they came back in, and the first half of the first floor of the new affordable housing building is the American Legion post in that part of Arlington. So that was very innovative. We've seen similar things with churches. Arlington Presbyterian Church sold their land also to APA in this case. And the church came back on the first floor, along with very interesting other community serving spaces. So that's out there. Is very interesting trend that we've been seeing. And some of the only land that's available for some of these nonprofits to work with is this institutionally owned land. There are some financial tools that are out there. You may have heard about some of these. So the JBG Smith, which is Amazon's landlord, one of the biggest commercial property owners in the area, they started a Washington Housing Initiative and spun off a Washington Housing Conservancy. What some of these equity funds are doing, and that one in particular, is really focused on preservation of the market affordable housing that many jurisdictions all over the region have been losing fast over the past 20 years. And so what they're doing is using some this equity fund money to help purchase older market rate affordable or market rate properties and turn them
Michelle,
into
about 30 more
committed
seconds.
affordable. Okay, I will skip over. I will talk about the broader housing market because I know that this is really important. Just to touch on what Joe had said, we do have a fundamental lack of housing supply overall. We really need to work on whatever development we can. One of the big things that we are focusing on in Arlington and in many other communities around the country actually is getting that balance, filling in the hole in the housing stock. We have large multifamily buildings, and then we have single family homes. And in many communities, such as ours, there's not a lot in the middle. And so this is called the missing middle housing. And so we're doing a lot of work with our zoning ordinance, analyzing it, studying it, talking to the community about it, to try to figure out how we can work primarily in what are now single family areas to diversify the housing stock, trying to have more duplexes, quads, those types of things, which really were kind of outlawed in many areas around the country in the middle of the last century. So I can talk about lots more, but I'll stop right there.
Thank you so much. Wow. Whatever you want to know about affordable housing, we have the people in front of us here on our screens who can give us the information. I mean, what an incredible wealth of information. Hal and Allison and your team, you did such an impressive job of putting together this panel. So I do have a list of questions here for the panel. The first question I have, I actually heard 3 of you already answer it. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it in case you have something to add, but we did get some good feedback already. And the question is, what can be done to increase affordable housing in the city of Falls Church? So with that, I'd like to start with Dana Lewis. Dana, do you have any suggestions?
I think there are a number of things that can be done to increase affordable housing, and some of them we're already doing. And so I think, I mean, of course, this is the year of the pandemic and all of that going on, but we have been doing a lot this year with affordable housing starting in 2020. So I'm really proud of that. And so what I would say, 3 things. One is funding. We need additional funding, and we've taken steps with that. Like I said, we applied and received the Amazon grant, which will really assist. I also think that, and the city also dedicated funds to affordable housing this year. So that's in the budget. That will also help. And we need these funds because if we are going to create affordable housing, then the city has to have a match to put in towards whatever additional funding that we get. And with that funding, I think that it's really important that we use those funds for preservation and creating affordable housing. And the preservation in particular is going to be expensive. There are units in the city that are set to expire. And so the city's going to have to put some money forward to try to do something creative to try to save those units. And a lot of times those include tax credits. And this is a program that's federal that gives you funds to match with what you have to create that housing. And then I also think that what else we need to increase affordable housing is city support. I think that if city residents can get behind affordable housing as being a priority, which I think has started to happen, that will really assist us to create those units. And people need to realize that, affordable housing affects a lot of things. It's health. People, when they don't have to have that transportation, that gives them time back with their families. It increases education because, if you are not concerned about housing, then you can focus on your schoolwork. It's an economic benefit because, employers want to be able to have housing for their employees. That's what the whole Amazon grant is about. And then I think that if we could have housing that meets a range of housing needs from the lower income to people that are, moderate income to say higher incomes, but all of those people, the one thing they have in common is that ideally, they shouldn't be spending more than 30% of their income towards their household cost. So it doesn't matter how much money you make. Many people, if you are one paycheck away from poverty, so what we want to do is try to provide housing at, that's affordable to people no matter what income you are. So a diversity of housing. And so that is going to require support and funding. So hopefully that wasn't too long.
Thank you. Julio, let me go to you. Do you have suggestions about what can be done to increase affordable housing in the city?
A lot of things could be done, but the first thing is this. Housing is being created by private sector. Until we don't have government taking control, investing, getting funds to take control of this problem of affordable housing, we're not going to have any solutions in the next future. I think it's one of the things, and we have to start innovating. I'm not sponsored by IKEA, but I think that we have to start thinking in maybe building smaller, beautiful, like you go to Japan, you go to Netherlands, you go to Finland, you go to Europe, and you will find small units efficient for people who wants to live close to where they work. So we have to start thinking in this. If we bring innovation, we bring architects that can figure out and design a new way, a new idea of building something where people can live, that would be increased competition and bring something that is new, is not something that we've been having in the past. Allow conversion. There are people already living in the city, Asian, struggling to pay those taxes. If you allow them to convert the basement, to convert the second floor, the third floor, that will allow people to have an extra income. But you have to support these people because maybe they don't have the money to do all this conversion. If you support them to change their utility, because you, of course, to have an independent unit, you have to have extra laundry and extra electricity. So you have to support them in the way that this is taking place, and you are allowing another person to solve this problem. Joe was really right. The more housing, the more affordability you may have. So allow some density, you know. But I'm going to talk about that later when I have to answer another question that it was previously set to be answered. But that's for now.
Thank you. And Letty, do you have any thoughts about what can be done to increase affordable housing?
I do. So there's definitely no shortage of ideas. And I think I guess the quick answer is there's no one solution, because I feel like we certainly are in this affordable housing crisis across the US, and especially in the Northern Virginia area. I think so I try to think of these things in terms of 5 broad buckets. So the first is we have to preserve what we already have, because frankly, we are losing it faster than we can build it. Up until Founders Row in Broadmoor, Washington, those are the first 2 buildings where we have permanently affordable units. When the city embarked on mixed use development about 20 years ago, we rightfully negotiate affordable units, but most of them expire after 15 or 20 years. And I think Dana showed you the chart of when those expirations are coming up. We've already started losing some. We have the opportunity to stop from losing them because it is far more expensive for us to build new than try to preserve. So that's the first thing, is preserve what we have. And I think that's both a combination of the inclusionary zone units that are in the mixed use buildings, as well as market rate buildings, where we can look at doing things like a city voucher program, buying down the rent to extend the affordability like we're doing with the Amazon program. The second bucket is keep building more units. So that inclusionary program that we've done is working pretty well for us. We have a base of about 240 units like we've talked about. We're adding 60 in the next 3 years or so, and that's a big deal and that's great. Our current policy is at 6%. Being able to get to 10% or more is important. And that's not without some other trade-offs though. I think the way we are accomplishing that at Broadmoor, Washington, as Joe said, is if you imagine that the developer is offering us a set amount of money, it's up for the city to figure out where we want to allocate it. And traditionally in the past, we kind of divvied it out everywhere. Those community benefits were shared between city and schools and parks. But I think for anyone who's lived in the city the past few years, you've known that we've made a lot of public investment in those areas. We have a new high school, a new library, a new city hall. We have a bunch of new park developments underway. And so I think it was time for us to actually reallocate that funding into affordable housing, which we frankly haven't done as much investment recently. So I think that requires flexibility on our part is, as we want to keep building more units in these new buildings, it doesn't have to be trading off every time, but we should be willing to look at those concessions differently. Philosophically, I think we also need to decide if we want to keep doing inclusionary zoning or whether we want a standalone development. And as Michelle talked about, happens a lot more in Arlington. I think that's more of a city, vision decision. I think my personal answer is I think there's room for both. At the rate, again, that we're losing market rate development, I think we do need to do both. And so then the question is, if so, where and when and how? And I think as Joe talked about, in general, we shouldn't vilify residential development because there are plenty of studies now that show that as you actually add density and add supply, that actually alleviates housing prices across the board. And so that's kind of a general concern in general across the city of people worrying about adding too much housing, but it's actually good for house prices across the board because as you add supply, prices should come down. And just as context, the Council of Governments, I think, issued a press release probably about 2 years ago where they did a really extensive study that in the DC region, we need to add 100,000 units of housing by the year 2045. And clearly the city plays a role in that to really maintain kind of economic growth and quality of life. And so the whole region is growing. And so I think, again, we just shouldn't be afraid of residential development. The third bucket is we need money. So whether it's Amazon grant money, clearly keep pursuing the free money, developer contributions, whether it's getting the voluntary concessions and units or trading them for cash, because that is a new additional flexibility we've added in there. Third is really in our budget. Are we willing to carve out money from our own operating budgets each year? I think Michelle talked about how much Arlington puts in. The city, I think for the first time, actually contributed to Affordable Housing Fund in this upcoming budget. We're putting in $100,000. And that's the first time it's ever been done in my 5 years on council, and I think ever. And so that's a big deal. You know, we have to put our money where our mouth is and be willing to actually put money towards this if this is something that we believe is important. And then long term, I think we should think about a sustainable funding source. I don't think carving out of the budget every time is the right way to go, and probably not the right time to think about things like a meals tax, but we can certainly look at what happened in Alexandria. They added 1% of their meals tax and dedicated it as a funding stream for affordable housing. And nothing dire happened with the restaurant businesses, and it was actually well received. So that's something that we can think about kind of on the post-COVID recovery side. The fourth bucket, which we started talking about, is really not just affordable housing, but thinking about more diverse housing stock. So traditionally, we've created housing in the city between that 60 to 80% AMI. And just as context, AMI is area median income for a family of 4 in the DC region, that's about $100,000. So we are trying to serve households between $60,000 to $80,000 total in their income. I think for the first time, we're actually having inclusionary zone units at Broad and Washington that dips closer to 40% AMI. So that really hopefully can serve people who are actually working at the grocery store downstairs and not just teachers and firefighters. And that is an important population that we want to be able to serve. So that's kind of one example of kind of what diverse housing stock could mean. The second is that missing middle that Michelle talked about. So whether that's townhouses, duplexes, accessory dwellings, we frankly just haven't built a lot of housing there across the board. We have this barbell strategy where we have single family homes on one side, and then very intentionally in the city, we built small apartments that really diversify our demographic base. But I think that results in actually losing some generational and socioeconomic diversity. When people want to downsize from that single family home, we don't have great options for them. When people want to grow from their 2-bedroom condo or 2-bedroom apartment, they have nowhere else to go. And so that's something that we need to be really intentional about and think about, is that really great for the long-term health of the city? Along the lines of kind of diverse housing stock, I want to make sure we talk about cottages. So about 4 years ago, the city was the first in this region to create a cottage housing ordinance where we allow tiny houses essentially. And if you've been on Railroad Avenue near the WNOD, we have 10 houses on that piece of property in lieu of what would have been 4 large single family homes. And so I think that is a great way for us to start dipping our toes into thinking about single family zoning differently. I think elsewhere you've talked about quads and duplexes, which I know feels really scary and really radical. But I think as we think about how land is used in this region, I think 70 to 80% of our land is zoned for single family use. And I think we need to start thinking differently about it. I think cottages and granny flats are a really great incremental way for us to think about how to house people. And I think Julio talked about how you can help that, offset high mortgage prices and make it more affordable, let people age in place, bring their seniors in, et cetera. Along the same lines is actually thinking about preserving single family homes. I think if you know Falls Church and you know Arlington, you've seen a lot of the $800,000 Ramblers that get torn down and converted into $1.5 million houses. That happens by right. So as a city, we can't really stop that from happening, but we can certainly think about how to incentivize and preserve that, because that is important, kind of missing middle. It's kind of unfortunate that 800,000 is considered middle housing, but thinking about how do we preserve and incentivize preservation of those small single family homes is important. And then the last one, because it is budget season, so my fifth bucket is really thinking about tax rate. And so right now we're talking about affordable housing with capital A, but for me, affordable also means affordable with a little a. I think we need to think about tax rate, and the budget is not an endless spigot of funds, and really making sure that we recognize that there's fixed income households in our community, and we need, like my in-laws, and we should do everything we can to keep the tax rate manageable so that we let those people stay in the city if they want to.
Thank you. And Michelle, in your opening remarks, you gave some really good strategies. Do you have anything to add about what can be done to increase affordable housing?
Well, so there's one theme that I think hasn't been talked about yet, but I've heard in hearing about the history of housing in Falls Church and seeing some of the numbers. I think one of the things that would be important for everybody to think about is the length of affordability for any commitments that you're getting for affordable housing. Obviously, the shorter the commitment, the more likely it is that they will just start to go away, and then you'll have another round of preservation needs sooner rather than later. So one of the things that, and this is again in the Arlington case, this is one of the differences between any inclusionary type units, so that we might have that are mixed into a market rate property. Those are typically just by law, the way that the law is, they're typically only 30 years affordable. But when we have the money through the Affordable Housing Investment Fund and we provide that as a loan to a nonprofit, our nonprofits are able to provide commitments for 50 and 60 and even greater number of years. And it's nonprofit owned, which means that the long-term nature of that is that when that nonprofit gets to that, 60, 75 years, they will reestablish it. It's part of their mission to keep that housing affordable. So you can increase your supply by not making sure you don't lose that supply. And the other thing that's important, and I don't know much about how you guys are designing your affordable homeownership program with the Amazon funds. But one thing that I would point out there is that there is if anybody is familiar with the concept of community land trusts, this is a method that is used particularly in homeownership to maintain affordable homeownership in perpetuity. So that means basically forever. And that's a way of making sure that whatever investments that a community puts into that affordability means that that's not going to disappear over time. And so the Habitat for Humanity of Northern Virginia, which is active in Fairfax County and Alexandria for the most part, they may have done something in Alexandria, I'm not sure. They got together with other habitats from around the state, and they created a brand new entity called the Virginia Statewide Community Land Trust. And that is an entity that is going to hold the title to the land upon which affordable units are built. And they will sell the affordable units without the land. So it'll be subject to a long-term land lease, sell the affordable units to low and moderate income home buyers. And community land trusts are known as one of the few ways that are available to maintain affordability of homeownership over time. So that's just something I would mention, particularly because this is a new opportunity that's just being created. I'm on the full disclosure, I'm on the board of the Virginia Statewide Community Land Trust. We just had our first meeting in January, so it's new. I'd be glad to share more information with you guys about that.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, you talked about how developers support affordable housing. Do you have anything to add about how affordable housing could be increased?
So I had 5 bullet points written down, and between everyone's spoken so far, I think all 5 have been hit on. So in the interest of time, I won't go back and touch on them, but I think a lot of the points that have been made now, again, are very salient to the cooperation, the negotiation, the communication between developers and the city.
Okay, thank you. So my next question, we talk about inclusion. So I would like to get the panel's perspective on what policies could be developed to promote diversity in the city of Falls Church. And for this one, let's start with Michelle.
Well, everything that you do to create more multifamily affordable housing is an investment in your community's diversity. But as Letty has said, we can't just leave it there. If you only focus on multifamily affordable, which is incredibly important, by the way, so I'm not saying it's not, then you end up with a bit of a barbell type situation, just like Letty had said, and what I was talking about, the zoning reform. So I think that all communities, again, I mentioned this is an issue all across the country. They are looking at their zoning. The zoning has been in place since the early 20th century. So in other words, America wasn't born with zoning. It was created in the early 20th century. It was used for very, making communities exclusive, and making communities, the end result of which was often making communities very white, and very, these days, limiting, particularly if you limit areas to only single family homes, particularly large single family homes. I love your cottages, by the way, but the large single family homes, you are limiting the demographics, just like Julio was saying. You're limiting the demographics of who can live there. Taking a look at relaxing some of those zoning policies that have really excluded so many different groups of people from our communities is something that we all need to do more of. Again, across the country, we're doing it in Arlington. Lots of other places are doing it, Montgomery County. Just taking a look at that zoning and seeing what we can do to move beyond the restrictive, exclusive, single family nature of many of our communities. And it can be done in a fine-tuned sort of scalpel way, or it can be done in a broad way. Like you might have heard of Minneapolis and, eliminating exclusive single family zoning. But there are many ways to do it. But the bottom line is there's a lot of land in every community designated specifically for pure single family housing. And maybe loosening that up a little bit is one way that we can add some diversity.
Okay, thank you. Julio, what policy changes would you think of to promote diversity in the city? And let us know if you're thinking about racial diversity, economic diversity, what your thoughts are.
Okay. That word, inclusion, means a lot. What inclusion means, it's including everyone. That is something that is not being done in housing. You cannot leave that exclusively to Joe as a developer, or exclusively to Lady Hardy that is representing and fighting for affordable housing. You have to include the people who live, the people who work, the developers, the city staff, everyone that form a strong force to start thinking about the solutions, because like Lady said, this is not just one bullet may fix everything. No, you have to get the ideas of every single group to see how we can work this together. That's the first thing, including everyone. And this means bringing out new ideas on how we can solve this together.
Okay, thank you. Joe, do you have any ideas about policies that would promote diversity in the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on quite a few of them, frankly. Letty mentioned, and I mentioned in my introduction, the incorporation of different AMI tiers. That's a way of getting economic, diversity into the city. There is, different tools that are utilized, whether it's cash or on-site affordability. But one thing I did want to bring up, and it's nothing specific, but it's just being open-minded to new possibilities. We've already touched on the cottages, which is a fascinating. I mean, as far as I'm aware, that deal has won a ton of awards just for its innovation and its creativity. And on a much smaller scale, for example, at Founders Row, we're doing the first active adult community, which is units restricted to individuals 55 years and older. And included in that is affordability. So now you have affordability for senior citizens. Who knows what's coming down the road? 2 years ago, co-living was the huge thing, and maybe that comes back post-pandemic. I don't know. But you never know what's next. So I think it's being open-minded as you have the tools, figuring out different ways of incorporating those tools into the product will create more diversity inherently.
Okay, thank you. Letty, do you have any further comments on policies?
You know, I do. So clearly go deeper into AMIs, the missing middle that we've all talked about. But we currently have a policy where for the affordable dwelling units, we used to have this lottery system and now we have a prioritization system. One of the ways we prioritize handing out those units is if you live and work in the city, which I think, you know, on the surface makes a lot of sense, right? We want to make sure that we take care of the people who live here and who need affordable housing. But given that we are actually the least racially diverse in the region, and this is something that I am not proud of, and I think it's a product of both our high housing prices, the fact that we're a desirable place to live, and I think frankly our history, we are already not diverse. So if we actually want to welcome diversity, we probably need to rethink about that policy, right? Maybe we should actually welcome people outside of the city to be prioritized on the list, because we're only prioritizing people who already live here. That just keeps circling. It's the same population again. And so that's something for us really tactically for us to think about. But again, it's all of the above. It's the racial diversity, socioeconomic, and it's generational diversity are all personally important to me.
Okay, thank you. And Dana, I'll let you wrap up the conversation about policies that might promote diversity.
All right, so I think this is something that's very important, and just, I think one of the biggest things that the city can do is preserving well, first of all, when you talk about diversity, diversity is race. It talks, you know, it's also talking about a diversity of housing types. But I think one of the biggest things the city can do is preserve the housing that we already have that is, you know, affordable. And so there's a property in the city that tax credits were used with that property and they're going to be expiring. That's one of the biggest things I think the city can do in the future, is to keep those units, 96 units of affordable housing. And it's very diverse as far as income and race. And I think it's going to be very important for the city to do everything it can to preserve that property. And then I also think diversity has to do with, you know, we have housing for seniors and persons with disabilities. We have a group home in the city that was recently built. That type of thing adds to diversity, because when people have disabilities, there's a place for them to go. And then I think with senior housing, there's a property in the city, Winter Hill Apartments, where it's majority seniors that live there. And that's really important that we keep that in the city as well. And the city does its part by assisting with property maintenance type of items to help that property owner keep that property affordable. And I just think using creativity to make a diversity of housing types for persons at the very low income all the way up to moderate income is going to be very important. And that creativity can have to do with accessory homes. We have a city committed unit program that where we're holding units affordable. There's a covenant on there, and we're keeping them affordable for people at the very low income. Because, you know, it's a diversity of workers in the city. I mean, we have people that maybe wait tables, then we have, like Letty said, firefighters, and then maybe we have people who, you know, are consultants or that type of thing. So it's a diversity of workers that are in the city, including city employees. And we need to be looking at housing to meet all of those needs. So that people don't have to move out of the city or have those high commute times, you know, because, you know, you don't want to spend all the money that you have on gas. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure that we meet that diversity of housing types. And also, I feel that diversity of race and income is very important to the city. It's part of the city's vision that it's an inclusive community. So if that's what we value, then we need to do everything that we can to make sure that it stays that way. I think somebody said, I don't remember what someone here said, you know, if we keep the way things are, then we may eventually have a community with a total lack of diversity. And I don't believe that's what we want when we look at the city's vision. So I just think anything that we can do to keep moving forward.
Okay. All of these comments have really been so powerful in describing the state of affordable housing and what affordable housing means and what we can do. So we have not too much time left, and I see that there are some questions. And so if Allison, if you could, or Hal, kind of to ask those questions that people have in the audience. And then at the end, I know some of the speakers would like to have kind of a wrap-up comment. And if we could allow maybe 1 minute for everybody to make their kind of closing, very brief comment. I know there are a lot of topics here and we don't have enough time to really go through all of them. So let's hear a couple of the questions from the chat.
Okay, I'm going to combine a couple because a couple of them relate to accessory dwelling units. So Councilmember Hardy, will you please talk about what's the city's current law as to what the city allows in terms of building accessory dwelling units? And then do you see political will for expanding zoning so that accessory dwelling units are more flexible and able to be built and other zoning changes? So the second part of the question is about political will for these changes.
Got it. And I may actually have Dana help chime in on the current laws for accessory dwelling. So officially they are allowed in the city, but there's certainly a lot of rules that make it very hard to do them. I think my understanding is one of them is they have to be attached to the house. And so that makes it complicated. And there's usually a special use permit that you have to get. And so I think as part of the grant that we talked about earlier, we actually had a new accessory dwelling ordinance written so that we could actually implement it if we wanted to. So far, there has not been a push to get that on the books. So I think that brings up the political will point. Dana, do you have anything to add on what the current rules are for accessory dwelling?
No, I think you pretty much described it.
Okay. So political will in general. Obviously, political will, it means that it takes 4 votes on anything to happen in city council. There's 7 of us. And I think the good news is that you certainly have a city council now who is more supportive of affordable housing and sees the connection to housing back to our values of being welcoming and diverse. So I think that's important. But at the end of the day, political will, in my opinion, comes from community support. It has to come from all of you, right? So if you all say you want this, it helps make it easier when I vote for it. And so we have to be willing to make trade-offs. And I think that's really the hard thing at the end of the day. I think as leaders, if everything is a priority, in my opinion, then nothing is a priority. So we really have to make some choices here. And I think at the end of the day, it also requires community support to transform into actually community change. So if you put up, for example, a Black Lives Matter yard sign this past year, we have to actually go from yard signs and name changes of schools to actually turning them into real policy changes and understanding the implications in our neighborhood. And so we talked a lot about today, the hows, like various things like missing middle, granny flats, going deeper in the AMIs. We talked so much about policy, but at the end of the day, there's implications for you all as citizens and community members. That potentially means different types of housing in your neighborhood. Is that something that you're willing to accept? That could mean density. It could mean, mixed use buildings along Broad Street. It could mean granny flats in your backyard. Are we okay and willing to accept those types of policy changes? Because at the end of the day, political is one thing, but I think if there's a groundswell of community support to back up a lot of these policy changes, it makes my job easier. Because I can advocate all I want, but at the end of the day, I work for the citizens of Falls Church, and the citizens of Falls Church have to be very loud and clear that housing, both affordable as well as diverse housing, is important. Thank you.
Okay, and will somebody speak to the idea of taking advantage of some of the homes that are for sale as tear downs, as kind of happens in this market? And are there opportunities, whether through the Amazon grant or otherwise, for the city to make changes that would keep those smaller and relatively affordable?
I'm happy to talk about that, but as well. So preserving single family home is hard. I think the plan with the Amazon grant money is to be able to buy townhouses and condos, just frankly, because single family homes are just so expensive in Falls Church. But there are rules that we can put in place. We can put incentive programs. So if we put in incentives such as, we'll give you grant money to renovate, that might help preserve smaller single family homes as opposed to creating tear downs. So that's kind of one idea. Another is actually changing setbacks, changing parking requirements to actually make it more palatable to keep them as small. So there are a bunch of ideas like that I think planning and housing staff have ideas on how to preserve single family homes. But I think in terms of the target housing that the Amazon grant money is going to go towards is likely more condos and townhouses, just because single family homes are so expensive and we won't be able to get to as many of them. Dana, do you have anything to add?
I'd agree with what you said. And if there are any single family homes that are, are available that just happen to be affordable, or if there are any city residents who would like to keep their homes affordable. I have run across some city residents that are interested in affordable housing. So reach out to us and we can help keep that unit. If you're retiring or moving out of the area, if you'd like to assist us with keeping that unit affordable, that would be great as well. But like Letty said, with our Amazon program, we're going to do any home that we can afford and make it more affordable, whether that's townhome, condo, but more than likely it will be condos and townhomes. So we'll just see.
Okay, thanks. And back to Nancy for closing statements.
Okay. So if I'll call on the panelists, if you could just give a 1-minute closing remark of and what you would like to talk about for affordable housing. And so this time around, I think we'll start with Joe.
Sure. Well, I just want to say thank you again for having me on this panel. This was really helpful, frankly, for me to hear from so many different voices, and I hope I was able to contribute and kind of pull the curtain back a little bit as well. And I just want to leave again with where I started with, to say that, for-profit residential development should not be a dirty word. I hope that it's a rising tide, frankly, for affordability. We're proud of the contributions we've been able to make in the community of Founders Row and what we will continue to make at Founders Row, and look forward to having discussions like this for Founders Row 2 and any other projects in the future. So thank you again, and I applaud you all for hosting these meetings and for having these conversations. They're incredibly important.
Thank you. Michelle.
I think Letty kind of said what I was going to say for my closing remarks, which is to keep doing events like this, keep doing things that engage citizens in the community and educating leaders of all different kinds and creating leaders of all different kinds who are interested in affordable housing. That is very much a part of what we do in Arlington. When I testify at a lot of our county board hearings on various affordable housing initiatives that are being considered. And a lot of the times when I'm doing that testimony, I'm technically speaking to the county board, but the additional audience that is extremely important is the citizens that are listening to the decision-making process, so that they understand how important affordable housing is. So that is my message. Keep doing these things. Work with your fellow Falls Churchians. Is that what you call yourselves? If you're going to put yard signs up for more affordable housing. So.
Thank you. Julio, do you have some comments to make?
Yeah, thank you so much. Before I do this, I wanted to just mention something. If we adopt a policy next to the affordable housing to increase density in designated areas, we know that we can impact affordable housing. If we define where we are going to make the major impact, like in Broad Street, Park Avenue, High Cook, Lee Highway, Hillwood, and Washington Street, if we define that, we are doing something. And finally, this is something that I said yesterday, and this is, we as city, we are like a body. And sometimes when we have a hot potato, we don't want to have that in our hands. So we start procrastinating. If we don't adopt a policy of just doing things right now, if we continue procrastinating, this problem is going to be worse and worse and worse. So start doing things right now. I applaud all of the things that have been done, increasing policies to a higher percentage, doing other programs, bringing more ideas, but start doing things right now. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you all for start thinking in the same direction. That's going to help a lot the city. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Julio. Let me turn it to Dana for any closing remarks.
I would just say that I think the time is now for us to try to create and preserve additional housing. I think, the housing department, we have spent and human services department, we've spent the last year kind of trying to help people navigate, this trying time of COVID and keep people housed. And so people are very concerned right now. I think we have the policies in place. We've updated our policies. Like I said, the comp plan, the affordable living policy. And we had the consultant come give us all of these great ideas. We have additional funding. I mean, we're going out there trying to get the grants that are necessary. Council is doing its part, and the city is making a contribution, a financial contribution to affordable housing. And then we're going to try to increase that. I think we have the council right now that's really concerned about it, about affordable housing. It's at the forefront of the things that they're working on. And I haven't really seen that before. So that really makes me feel great as working as a staff. We have a great housing commission right now. They're really active and involved. And they're really doing everything they can to try to increase the amount of affordable housing. Like I said, we're getting 10% from 6%. They're doing everything that they can. Creativity is going to be very important. We've been having this discussion about zoning. That's a creative solution to this problem. We need more creativity like that. With our covenants, we're looking at extending the affordability period to the lifetime of the property from what we've had, so we don't have those expirations. So I think all of those things are going to be really important, but the last piece is you. I know I sound like I'm running for office or something here, but we got to have community support for these things. None of these things are going to work if, like Letty said, if you can't, imagine that affordable housing being near you or supported, or think that, this might be your kids, fellow student that they are in class with. It could be the worker, the person that's waiting on your table, the fireman, any of these folks. It could be you. You could be one check away from a paycheck away from needing affordable housing. So we really need that support, just increasing support to help us get these things done. I really feel like the time is now, like everything is kind of aligning. So we just need to have that support. And that's what I would say.
Thank you, Dana. So Letty, let me turn it to you to close out the panel remarks.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to join you all. So thank you all for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. I think it's evident based on the past hour and a half, there is certainly no shortage of ideas. We know what to do, we know how to do it. I think at the end of the day, it would be very cliche for me to say that you should vote for people who obviously support these policies. But what you should take away is that you should actually just try to be one of those people. Whether it's join a board and commission, whether it's run for office yourself, whether it's talking to your neighbor at the end of this and commit to saying that, yes, I will support policies like this. I will support changes that could happen in my neighborhood. I will support making trade-offs in the operating budget in the city where less money may go to something I really care about, but because that money will be supporting affordable housing or more diverse housing, that is something that ultimately supports the city values. So ultimately, again, as everyone's echoed already, it kind of all starts with the community. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. And before I turn it back to Hal and Allison, I want to kind of sum up what you said, what you all have said, and really what benefits one of us benefits all of us. And I heard your closing by saying, let's say, just do it. The time is now, Falls Churchians. And so with that, let me turn it over to Allison and Phil. Or Allison and Hal, I'm sorry.
Well, good gracious, everybody. How many home runs can you hit in a 9-inning game or an hour and a half? And it's almost bewildering. There's so many ideas, but a couple of things struck me that I'd like to share before we finish today. Contrast this discussion, because this will be on Zoom on the CBC and League of Women Voters websites. Contrast this discussion with the first forum, which painted a fairly bleak pictures of 40 years of inactivity and indifference. Even though there were lots of people trying as hard as they could. We do need to get to completely eradicate one no equal 100 yeses. That's the task before us. So that's the first thing. I wish there had been more time because we budgeted an hour and 15 minutes, and clearly we had some other really helpful questions that would help us understand Joe. We would wanted Joe to explain the nature of the process of negotiation, because the public just doesn't really understand what goes on and has a lot of suspicions about it. We had other questions that we wanted to address to Julio, who actually experienced being in an ADU, and what he saw as somebody did that, as somebody who applied for it, as somebody went through the process, and as somebody who lived it. So we didn't get to everything we wanted to. I do note that the turnout was lower than we'd hoped. It was 75 the first time, about 37 or 38 this time. I'm not totally dismayed by that, because a lot of the leaders of Falls Church are on this Zoom call, and that's what it's going to take. It takes leadership. I will offer my heartfelt thanks to the panelists. Thank you so much for being part of this enterprise, and I thank my colleague Allison and my colleagues Mark and Ellen and Ken for the work that they've done in helping get this organized and underway. I will point out that we have our final Zoom conference in June, early June. And a lot of what we heard in our closing statements and the discussion leading up to it will be set the table for the third, because it's on where do we go from here. There's a lot of ideas now, and then we're going to have a further discussion in a little bit more detail of sort of fleshing out some of the ideas with a different cast of characters in a couple of months. And so Allison, any final thought from you?
Just the date of the final forum is Sunday, June 27th, the last Sunday in June. So we hope to see all of you there.